Hey guys, and welcome back for another video. Today we're gonna go over Destruction Warlock. As some of you might know, it's soon to be buffed quite a bit, but more on that later. In this video I'll be covering everything from stats, gear, talents, legendaries, covenants, soulbinds, conduits, some tips and tricks I've learned along the way, as well as the upcoming changes in 9.1, which I just mentioned as well. Without further ado, let's get into the video. As always, I hope you enjoy. First, let's talk talents. If there's one thing Destruction does not lack, it's flexibility within the talents. The spec has plenty different builds, depending on what dungeon or raid fight you're doing. It has a lot of choice, and honestly, it's a lot of fun. Anyway, let's start with it. Let's take a look at the first talent row to start us off. Contrary to what I just said about the talents being flexible, the first row and the second row sadly almost never change, to be quite honest with you. Even in PvP it just doesn't change. You will want to run Flash over. The increase to conflagrate damage as well as the additional charge of Backdraft is much more valuable to us Destrologs compared to Eradication and Soulfire talents. The reduction on the cast time of Chaos Bolt and Incinerate provided from Backdraft smoothens the spec dramatically as opposed to the other options on this row. On the second row, you will almost always reverse entropy. What this talent does is simple. It has a chance when you use a spell to proc and grants you 15% haste for 8 seconds. A simple talent that also smoothens the spec even more when you get a proc. You will mostly be playing this talent, however, there is a very small mention to be made for internal combustion, specifically for raiding when it comes to single target fights like Sludge Fist. Still, reverse entropy remains a solid option in the same case scenario. So, if you want to make your life simple, just go for reverse entropy. If you want to have some fun and try different stuff, internal combustion can be a fun choice as well. When it comes to the third row, more of a utility row. Compared to most of the other classes out there, every single talent here is viable and sees play in most different types of content. Let's firstly look at Demon Skin. This talent tends to be the go-to for overall survivability. Having looked at all three and tested them, Demon Skin is the pick when you don't need the other two or when you don't particularly want an extra button to press. When it comes to Burning Rush, this is a talent pick for when you need mobility, however at the price of your health, making Burning Rush a bit more difficult to play with and manage. Still a very strong choice for when you need mobility. Lastly on this row we have Dark Pact, my personal favorite choice on this row. You sacrifice 20% of your current health to get 250% of the value of that health as an absorb shield. Great to pre-use before a hard hitting ability. But like always with this type of talent row, whatever you choose, make sure you are using it to your advantage and not picking it for the sake of picking it. If you're unsure of what to pick or you just can't get used to using any of the other abilities, just go for Demon Skin. You still get bonus from it at any point and it's an extra defensive, and therefore does not require you to use the ability itself. Moving on to the fourth row, we have two talents that see play, starting with Cataclysm, the most used talent on this row, to be quite honest with you. An AoE ability that deals some good damage, as well as applying Immolate to every single target standing in the explosion itself. This talent is insane as it dots everyone with your Immolate, which also generates shards, so that means you can keep on spamming Chaos Bolt, you can put down Rain of Fire. Pretty amazing choices, making this ability the preferred choice. However, there is a mention to be made for Inferno, as some dungeons like Necrotic Wake and Halls of Atonement have some insane burst potential, especially if you play with the legendary Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning, which I'll be mentioning later in the video, but for short, using a Soul Shard reduces your Inferno's cooldown. Fifth row is another utility row. All of the talents here can see play, however I'm slightly biased towards Coil as it's a heal and a crown control that does not stop with damage. That and also has a Destrolock. You can havoc a target and double Coil, making Coil a very strong choice. For the other two are solid options if you lack the CC. When it comes to raiding, always go Coil for the extra heal. For dungeons, try all three of them and pay attention to what other specs are in your team right now or in your LFG group, whatever. Just make sure you are using what you're going to be using. Sixth row, we have two solid options once again, starting off with Roaring Blaze. This talent is insane for single target and priority damage. Your conflagrate now increases your immolate, incinerate and conflagrate damage by 25% for 8 seconds. Not much to say, it's just an insane talent for single target and 2 targets, as you can also get the bonus on Havoc. A second option on this row, and the more RNG choice, is Reign of Chaos. It gives you a 15% chance to summon an additional Infernal in your Infernal window every time you use a Soul Shard. This talent, quite honestly, is a lot of fun when you get a bunch of procs. Your damage skyrockets right up to the top of the meters, and it goes quite well, especially when you use the Inferno talent on the previous row I mentioned. On the last row, we have 3 used talents. Let's start off with Soul Conduit. Soul Conduit's design is simple. You get 15% chance to gain back a Soul Shard when you use Soul Shard. The use behind this talent is mostly in dungeons, along with the talent Inferno and with the talent I just mentioned, which is Reign of Chaos. Up next, we have Channel Demon Fire. This talent does some nice moderate AoE damage and sees some plays, but it's nothing too exciting. It's pretty fun to play though, so check it out. It can work in dungeons, and I've seen some people play it as well in raid, mostly for AoE fights where there's not too much AoE, but also not too much single targets. Last talent we have is Dark Soul Instability, a talent that gives you 30% critical strike chance for 20 seconds. A massive increase to your damage, especially Chaos Bolt, since Chaos Bolt's damage is directly increased by critical strike chance, as it is guaranteed to crit. This talent can also do some pretty huge AoE, but generally I would recommend it for priority targets and single targets. With the talents out of the way, let's take a quick look at our stats and what we're looking for when gearing. This is not looking to change in 9.1, but if it does, I'll be making a new video just to make sure that you guys are kept up to date. Anyway, the first thing you want to make sure you have is Intellect. Go for item level first. Intellect being our main stat and taking a most important role this expansion will keep this role so far as we know. Second best stat will be Haste. Just making sure that you spend those shards and get more shards faster just seems to be the play when it comes to Destro. Followed by Mastery. Mastery I'll be explaining a bit later in another section, but basically what it does is it increases your damage, it increases your defenses. It's a pretty decent stat overall for Warlocks, specifically Destruction Warlock. Versatility is the last one, but does see some use, especially if you're doing content that's a bit harder perhaps in M+, specifically in really high keys. Outside of that, just prioritize the other stats I mentioned before. Now, here's a fun topic, being legendaries. Once again, Destruction sees some very entertaining flexibility when it comes to their legendaries, having up to 3 legendaries that see play depending on what content we're talking about. Let's start off with my personal favorite, which is Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summoning. This legendary is simple, but oh boy, does it make the Inferno build fun. What it does is, every time you use a Soul Shard, it reduces your Inferno cooldown by 1.5 seconds. This might seem weak or very simple at first glance, but trust me when I say that spamming Rain of Fire with the right talents will make your Inferno cooldown much shorter than the usual 3 minutes. I'll be showing all of the talents built with the legendaries I'll be mentioning, but this one tends to be specifically used with this build only, and honestly it's the most fun out of all of them, at least for myself. So I recommend you guys check it out. Next up we have Relic of Demonic Synergy, which is the weakest out of the 3 I'll be mentioning. All this legendary does really is increase your pet's damage by 10%. Nothing flashy, just a flat damage increase overall. See some play in dungeon and raids, however, the next legendary is going to be the most competitive one right now compared to this one. This legendary being Cinders of Ajakir. Now, sorry if I pronounced the name wrong, I'm not really good with names to be honest. What it does is give your Conflagrate an additional charge and reducing the recharge time of Conflagrate by 3 seconds. This overall makes destruction smoother and insane at making shards. You are literally a shard farming house at this point. This is the legendary that sees the most play in raids and is also one of the best choice in dungeons if you're not using Wilfrids. So you should really make this one as your first choice. Now keep in mind there are plenty of other legendaries out there and some of them do see play, just not as often, and if you really want to like try them all, go for it man, because some of them are pretty fun and make for some great builds. Covenants. Alright, now this one might be prone to change along the way to 9.1, and I will be making an update video if that were to be the case. But for now, the current best choice for Destruction Warlock, as well as the other two specs, is Night Fae. The ability itself does some decent damage, but it's not the biggest reason as to why we go Night Fae. The main reason as to why we go Night Fae is the Soulbind bonuses. They are just much better than all the other ones. What can I say? The added mobility from the signature ability Soul Shape is very welcome as well and makes Warlocks a bit more mobile, which is a department they don't quite have a lot of strength in. When it comes to Soulbinds, you're pretty open as a Night Fae Warlock, but both Nia and Korain see the most play when it comes to destruction specifically. Up next we have Necrolords with the Decimating Bolt ability, which makes your next 3 Incinerates deal 100% more damage. Nothing too amazing, tends to be the second best choice for destruction, where you will be running Boatsmith Aimee as your primary Soulbind. You also get Fleshcraft, making you a bit more survivable and perhaps allows you to run Burning Rush in more situations, but still nothing jaw-dropping. Still, it remains a very valid choice for raiding and is pretty close to Night Fae. I'll be mentioning Venthyr next, which sadly is the worst Covenant out of all of them, but does see some play in M+, and if you like the Venthyr vibe, then you should try it. It's pretty fun still. The Venthyr ability sadly being completely useless in raiding most of the time, though your Soulbind Nijina, the Mistblade, is pretty good. The ability itself just pushes Venthyr down. However, it's decent in dungeons, but that's about it really. Dwarf Shadows is always a nice useful ability on the other hand. Last but not least we have Kyrian, which grants us the ability Scouring Tithe, which is a dot with the following effects. If the target dies with this dot on them, you gain 5 soul shards instantly. Or if the target does not die by the time the dot runs out, it simply resets its own cooldown. This ability can be pretty huge if used properly, especially when it comes to doing Mythic Plus. However, it falls a bit short in raiding and also in PvP. For signature ability, you get your Yoo-hoo pet that gives you a vial that heals. Nothing too jaw-dropping once again, but still sees some play and could be quite fun depending on what changes they make to Pelagos. Up next we have class-specific conduits. Now, I won't be talking too much on Soulbinds as it will soon be upgraded and there will be a bunch of changes incoming in 9.1 and a lot of them seem quite strong right now, but I don't really want to talk about it because it's very prone to change as it's still early phase of the PTR on 9.1. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Let's firstly take a look at the decent potency conduits out there for Destruction Warlock, starting with Ashen Remains, which increases your Chaos Bolt and Incinerate damage if the target is affected by your Immolate. This is your best potency conduit, and you'll be using it a vast majority of the time. Next we have Combusting Engine, which is a half decent conduit. It increases your Immolate damage every time you conflagrate, so the rest of your Immolate dot damage will tick harder. Nothing too impressive, but still worth mentioning if you want a second potency conduit. Lastly, for potency conduits, we have Duplicitous Havoc, which increases the amount of damage transferred via Havoc, as the name suggests. This conduit is great on fights like Huntsman, but lacks on fights like Blood Council, for example, where you're just looking to get some shards out of your Havoc. Anyway, With the potency out of the way, let's have a quick look at finesse conduits. Starting with demonic momentum, a conduit that gives you mobility for 5 seconds after using demonic circle teleport. Some extra mobility, which is always useful in every type of content. It's just great. The second finesse conduit I'll include here is Fell Celerity, which is mostly for dungeons. It reduces the cooldown on Fell Domination, which basically instantly summons your pet at the cost of no soul shards. Now, what this does is a good example I always think about when I play Warlock is if you're doing Theater of Pain, if you want to help out your healer in a plus 15, or if you're doing high keys, what you can do is summon your Himp for a specific boss, like the Lich boss, where you can actually dispel with your healer and get rid of both dots, getting rid of most of the damage the fight really does, which is great. But out of that, yeah, it's decent. It's not an amazing conduit. Still worth mentioning though, because some people are looking to use it. To finish conduits, we'll go over 2 endurance slots, starting with Resolute Barrier, which reduces the cooldown of Unending Resolve every time you take damage at 5% or higher of your HP, with a 30-second cooldown on the effect itself. Nothing too amazing, but still useful, makes your biggest cooldown come back more often, and yeah, it just negates a lot of damage for your healer, so your healer will be thanking you if you're using it. The last conduit to mention is Diabolic Bloodstone, which gives anyone that uses Healthstone 10% leech, which is just a little nice addition for your team, and specifically for raids. It's quite great and really helps out the healers on fights like SLG, on all the fights, but yes, it's a great one to use. Anyway, that was it for Conduits. Next, we'll be looking at Mastery. Now, with most of what you need to play Destruction Warlock out of the way, let's take a look at Destruction Mastery, Chaotic Energies. The way that this mastery works does not affect your gameplay in any way, but will help you understand where some unexpected damage input or damage reduction comes from. When you use a damaging spell as a Destruction Warlock, your damage is increased by half of your mastery guaranteed. Let's say we start with the base mastery, which is 16%. Your damage is increased by 8% with another effect that increases your damage by up to another 8%. It doesn't mean you will always get 16% increased damage. You could well get 9% damage, could well mean 8.1% damage on a spell, but it still increases your damage by a certain amount, up to 8%, above the first 8%. There's not too much in the ways of playing around mastery as a Destruction Warlock, unlike some other specs out there. The first coming to mind would be my main Shadow Priest, which is the complete opposite. It also has a similar effect defensively. When you take damage, your damage is reduced by a certain amount, and then it can be decreased by another certain amount, which is basically the same idea. Is Destruction looking any decent for 9.1? We have yet to see the Warlock Covenant Legendaries, so a lot could change after this video is released, but a pretty chunky buff of 10% to Chaos Bolt is on its way in 9.1, making one of our main abilities hit way harder, as well as some insane buffs in PvP and some cool new PvP talents if you're into that. With the upcoming Affliction nerfs, Destruction might be looking like the best Warlock spec. With that said, much could still change on our way to 9.1, so keep that in mind, but it's looking pretty good for us, Destruction boys. Now for the last segment of this video, I'll be giving you some tips that every Destruction out there uses or wants to be using. Firstly, always try to have Immolate on as many targets as the fight allows, as it will generate soul shards every time the dot ticks on a target, so passively, making it a very important priority in your rotation. My second tip is to always be under the soul shard cap, as if you reach cap, you're wasting your soul shard generation, unless you're charging up for your burst or you're preparing for an Havoc window. Speaking of Havoc, my third tip is to always try to get a maximum value out of it. Your biggest goal on 2 target fights is to use as many Chaos Bolts and Conflagrate during your Havoc window. My last and not destruction specific tip is to use your basic Warlock spells like Gateway and Demonic Circle, and even Curses. It's your basic utility, yet it can save your dungeon group any day, and in raids it can make mechanics much easier to handle for your group. These were some of the most basic tips, and there are plenty out there, but I feel like the video has been going on for long enough, so for now I'll call it. But before I do, if you want more tips and content on Destruction Warlock, feel free to put it in the comments section. Don't forget to like, sub and hit that bell button, as it would really help out the channel grow if you enjoyed the vid. On a last note, a big thanks to KingoTheViking for giving me some of his raiding footage for the video. A link to his stream will be in the description below as well. If you want to see some good quality destruction progression on Castle Nafria, I recommend you go and check him out. Anyway, that was it for today, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Have a nice one.